Hello and welcome to Who's He at the Movies. It's nearly Halloween, so this time we're going to be looking at John Carpenter's 1978 classic, Halloween. I came to this film fairly late in life. I was probably in my 20s when I first saw it. Slasher movies never really appealed to me, but everyone told me that this one was a classic. And after watching it that first time, I wasn't really sure that it was. So after deciding to watch it again for this episode, I found that I'd actually changed my mind. Now, at this point, I'll usually go through a quick summary of the plot. But you know what happens. Kid kills his sister, spends years locked up in an asylum, escapes, returns to his hometown, begins killing again before being stopped. The end. But while this film is known for setting the template for a whole raft of imitators during the 70s and 80s, none of them have what this film does, and that's restraint. This is a very restrained film. It's not gory, in fact there's very little blood on show at all. And the build up to when Michael Myers does begin his rampage is very patient, with John Carpenter relying more on atmosphere and tension than overly relying on jump scares and blood and guts. And while this is described as a slasher movie, it straddles supernatural horror as well. But what do I mean by that? Well, let's look at the film's antagonist, Michael Myers. It is never explained why, as a 6-year-old child, he stabbed his sister to death on Halloween night in 1963. It's also never explained how, when escaping from his prison, that he knows how to drive a car. Nor is it explained how he's able to survive being stabbed and shot and continue as if nothing had happened. And just where does his superhuman strength come from? Well, as the character of Dr. Loomis says in the film, Michael Myers is just pure evil. And that's all we need to know about him. Until a few films later, of course, when they explain it away as a druid's curse. But the simple design of this character is what makes the film so iconic and really just often copied. Wearing a boiler suit and a modified William Shatner mask, the Shape, as he is known in this film, is a blank-faced force of nature. An unstoppable killing machine that unfortunately gave birth to other lesser slasher characters and also a series of films of ever-diminishing returns. But in this film, audiences had never seen anything like it before. And for the majority of the film, here it is just a bogeyman, or a boogeyman as the people of North America say it. By lurking in the hedgerows and the shadows, Michael Myers certainly comes across as more of a ghost than an escaped lunatic. Now, in films like Halloween, there is a mixture of ingredients that can be found in most other slasher movies, which have really become, tropes of the horror genre. Namely, the final girl, a disbelieving sheriff, and an expert on the killer. But firstly, let's look at the final girl of this film, Laurie Strode, played by Jamie Lee Curtis. While it seemed from the outset that Laurie would end up as one of Michael Myers' victims, her character is actually a wily and resourceful woman. As a character who's babysitting her neighbour's kids on Halloween, not only has she to look after herself, but also the 2 kids in her charge. And what is refreshing is that she's not some sort of superhuman who can wield a variety of weapons. Curtis's Laurie Strode is a normal person who is rightly scared out of her wits at this home invasion and realistically collapses in exhaustion after each encounter with Myers. And Jamie Lee Curtis is excellent in the role. She's not really given much to do until the final third of the film, but when called upon, she manages to stab Myers in a variety of ways, including a coat hanger in the eye. While this is nasty, there is no blood spurting in all directions and it's filmed in darkness, so it's left to the viewer's imagination just to how nasty this actually was. Now we come to the disbelieving sheriff, which in this case is Sheriff Lee Brackett, played by Charles Cyphers. And of course, a film like this would not be complete without the sheriff being the father of one of Michael Myers' victims. But here, while he doesn't necessarily believe that Michael Myers will return to Haddonfield, he does render assistance in the hunt, and refreshingly, he doesn't become one of Michael Myers' victims. Now, in other films of this nature, the sheriff will always meet a sticky end after spending the entirety of the film not believing anything that has happened, and also mistakenly arresting an innocent teenager. It's quite an annoying movie trope, but I'm glad to say that does not begin with Halloween. Lastly, we come to the expert on the villain, and in Halloween, this expert is Dr. Sam Loomis, played by English actor Donald Pleasance. Now, I've always found Donald Pleasance to be a very strange actor. He has starred in some very high-profile films such as The Great Escape and You Only Live Twice, but he mostly gives performances of an extremely creepy nature, with his blank-eyed stare and monotonous voice being used to effect. But in this film, well, he does give a completely different performance. His portrayal of Sam Loomis is reasonably restrained. Desperately trying to tell people just how dangerous Michael Myers is, he gives a slightly panicky edge to Loomis, which again is great, as Pleasance would not be believable as a superhero type doctor. So a small, bald, middle-aged man makes for a rather different type of hero. But, of course, this film also gave birth to another trope of slasher films: horny teenagers. Actually, horny teenagers who end up as fodder for the bad guy of the movie. Yes, this is where sex will get you killed, and in Halloween it's the characters of Linda and Bob who meet a nasty end after an evening of hot sex! Now, this is probably one of the best scenes in the film. When Bob goes downstairs to get post-coital beers, he is murdered by Myers when he's lifted up and pinned to the wall by a knife. Now, while this shows the supernatural strength of Myers, it also shows that Myers still really has the mind of a child, as he stands there tilting his head from side to side in an inquisitive manner while staring at Bob's corpse. Now, Myers then turns his attention to Linda and appears in the bedroom doorway wearing a white sheet over his head and Bob's glasses. And this scene is more unnerving than anything, as he just stands in the doorway and just stares at Linda while she attempts to talk to who she thinks is Bob. Only when she attempts to phone Laurie does Myers make his move. And what makes this scene effective is that the atmosphere is generated by not much happening. Just the sound of Myers breathing through the sheet and his stillness is enough to create tension, and when Myers does move, it makes that scene just that little bit more scary. But of course, it's the end of the film that shows Myers to be practically invulnerable. And each time when you think Myers is dead, he rises up, usually out of focus in the background. Obviously, the impact of scenes like this has lessened over the years, as every slasher film that came after Halloween follows this pattern. But in 1978, this must have just scared the pants off audiences. But Halloween set the template for a good many films of varying quality, but have kept horror fans suitably entertained one way or the other. It's often imitated, but really never bettered. And apart from The Thing, I think this is John Carpenter's best film. It's a simple and tight 90-minute movie, and there is nothing convoluted about the plot. As for backstory for the characters, only Michael Myers gets that here, but even then you never find out what his motivations are, and I really do like that ambiguity. And let's not forget the film's score. Composed by John Carpenter, it's become just as iconic as the film itself. And when I think that the 31st of October is coming, the Halloween theme, it always enters my mind. But one final observation. I think this film also introduced the concept of Halloween as almost like a public holiday to the UK. In 1978, old blighty trick-or-treating wasn't really a thing. I can remember Halloween being a very tame affair, with perhaps the occasional local baker putting a few plastic spiders on the ice buns in the shop window. But over the years, Halloween has certainly become more of an event in the UK, and this film has certainly helped to cement that, as on Halloween night there are other forces at work apart from ghosts and witches.